Well, hi everyone. Just here to say and wish you all a happy New Year. Obviously, I didn't wish you happy Christmas, but obviously that's gone, so I assume you've had a good Christmas. And I'm just going to really run through what we did in the last year, give you an idea of my accomplishments and my battles I had with all the stuff I've worked on. As you can see, some of the gears running in the background for. You get bored of looking at my face, you can look at the very interesting waveform on the spectrum analyzer here. Funny enough, actually, most of this gear behind me was tinkered with in the year that's just passed, so it has some relevance, I suppose. So yeah, I'm just going to really go through and let you know what I've done, what we did in the last year, and maybe next year, if I'm still around, we'll go on and do the same thing again. So at the beginning of the year, basically, we started off with I don't know if you remember, but the Technics SU3500. It's an amplifier I bought a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, probably more than that actually. It's funny how time just goes by, and it worked fine. I mean, it was okay, but obviously the amplifier was sort of dated 71, 72. All the components are getting on 50 years old. So I did a full recap on it, and that took me a couple of days. And there's a couple of stages or a couple of sections to the video of that, replacing the capacitors, cleaning the thing up, cleaning all the board up afterwards, setting all the bias and DC offsets and things like that off, getting it running as best as I can, basically. And that's a lovely amplifier, and that's one of the many amplifiers I have sitting at home in a rack that I just plug headphones in and listen to every now and then. And that's an amplifier I had as a child when I was 18, 19, and I think I picked it up from the hi-fi shop I was working at when I left school. And it's a great amplifier, so that's the real reason I went to such sort of pains to replace all the capacitors. And that followed actually with the Marantz 1060. I remember, if you remember, the 1060 I picked up. Same thing, I did a full recap on that, and that's got a similar sort of history to it as well. Actually, a friend of mine's mother bought one second hand, and I wasn't that impressed with the amplifier, I must admit. But it was always a sort of like an amplifier that had a good following, and I thought, well, it's worth spending the money on, because it's an old amplifier, similar sort of era, probably slightly earlier actually. Capacitor coupled output stage, a little bit more sort of like an earlier design to the direct coupled amplifier, the SU3500. There isn't really a huge amount of advantage between either, really. There's swings and roundabouts at the end of the day. So I did a full recap on that, same thing. I replaced all the electrolytics and cleaned it all up, and was surprised how nice the amplifier sounded, much better than the amplifier I remember as a child. Because I had both the amplifiers at the same time. I had the SU3500 and the Marantz 1060 at the same time, and I know I lent a couple of these amplifiers to friends of mine, and they all said the SU3500 sounded better. I'm not so sure now. When I compare the two, the Marantz 1060 has got a really nice wide stereo sound to it, and I love it. I think it's a lovely sounding amplifier, and I think it's possibly just because it's been recapped. I'm not sure, but to me it sounds better. And then, if you remember, that's the Revox B160 I bought, which is a very high-end tuner, non-working, and when we opened it up, if you remember, all these capacitors were strapped all over the board. So basically I removed all these capacitors that I thought had been bodged on for some reason, and I still to this day haven't really understood why these capacitors have been added. And there was but the main problem was one of the electrolytics that had actually gone short on the power supply, and removed that and sort of got it working. But then we couldn't get any audio. If you remember, we had the display up, but there was no audio, and that was simply because there was a blown fuse in the power supply when the cap had blown up, and that wasn't releasing a muting circuit. So that was a bit unusual. That's a muting circuit in a tuner is quite unusual, but replaced that. Didn't touch the alignment because I didn't think it needed doing, and it's a fantastic sounding tuner. It is. It's the only thing I would say, it seems to be a little bit over bloated with the bass, but apart from that, it's a great little tuner. Sounds really nice. Then I picked up an amplifier I had for a while, an A757. Is it 757 or 57? No, it's a 757. It's a Pioneer. It's a brute of a thing. It's sort of 110 watts per channel or something like that. It weighs an absolute ton. And I bought that amplifier off a chap about 5 years ago. And that was, I used it for a while and it seemed fine, and then I put it in the loft and brought it down earlier in the year, and the sound became very distorted. And that was the amplifier that we searched around and managed to find a dry joint with a bad regulator. If you remember, underneath there's a bad connection on the regulator. Resoldered that, put it back together, and then it didn't work. And then I spent the next couple of hours trying to work out what the hell had gone wrong. And then I found that one of the like the ribbon cables was put in slightly skew whiff and wasn't making contact, or was out of sync with its connector. I replaced that, and that amplifier's working fine and still works fine. Although I'm not impressed with the sound quality particularly. I don't think it's a particularly nice sounding amplifier. I need to spend a bit more time with it, but that was one of those amplifiers I bought, and sort of everyone was saying how wonderful it is, and I'm not that impressed. So, yep, there was that. And then it was the PM350, the Marantz PM350, and that had a tone control problem, if you remember. First of all, the sound was very low and distorted. I think it was low distorted, or there's no sound at all, and that was an op amp on the tone control board. And we replaced that, and we got the amplifier going, but then we had no tone controls. And after a lot of searching around, we found that the tone control slider was actually a totally open circuit, and therefore that it was just making no difference at all. So we had to strip the sliders down and sort of bend the contacts and put them back together, and that seems to have fixed that. That amplifier seems to be working fine. And actually, funny enough, that Marantz 1060 was actually a highly regarded amplifier, a budget amplifier back in the mid-80s, I suppose it was. Yeah, mid-80s to late 80s, I suppose. We did a quick repair on the Cambridge P500, which had bias pots that were intermittent, that every now and then used to make it blow fuses, because all the amplifier would go into sort of like Class A mode and blow the fuses. That was a simple enough fix. Then trusty Tektronix 2440 had a lobotomy and forgot what it was and what it was doing, so we had to replace the battery in that and do a full recalibration again. We did one of those a couple of years ago, and if you remember, that's a bit of a pain in the arse setting all the settings up, but eventually got back there, and we've been using it ever since. It's been absolutely fine, so that's good. Then we bought the Music Fidelity T1 tuner, which is actually the same friend who actually bought the Marantz 1060. Expecting wonders with this Music Fidelity tuner. Opened it up to find cheap Chinese components in it, and a highly microphonic front end. Nice looking tuner, has that sort of like slight British hi-fi minimalist look to it. Poor performance, poor sensitivity, everything about it is poor electronically. Rubbish tuner, waste of time spending any money on one of those. I hope Music Fidelity stuff isn't always like that, but I have heard that a lot of Music Fidelity stuff has got cheap crap components in it. Shame really, because they do make some decent stuff, I do know that. And then it was the Linn Sondek. I remember the Linn Sondek with the every now and then I'd come downstairs and the turntable would be turning, and I'm thinking, well, I haven't turned this on, so I decided to recap all the components on the Valhalla board, and also do a slight modification to the power switch to allow it to, when you press the power switch, you have to hold it for a couple of seconds before it turns on, and that was just a capacitor across a monostable, and since I've done that, I haven't had any more problems. So that was just a modification. And then I think a lot of your sort of interest waned on a lot of people, because I had the Bamford EG1 engine I rebuilt, put some new valves in it, got the compression back up, and had that running, and I think that was a couple of videos, and that's actually, funny enough, sitting right next door in the garage, and that was just a little project really to get an old stationary engine going that I've always wanted to do. So That's sort of not in the electronic side, I know, but it's still fairly interesting. And then we did a full alignment on the HP 8662A. If you remember, it was doing some strange things on power up, which is fairly normal for one of these, but I did a full calibration and it was quite a long drawn out task, quite a lot of complicated sort of adjustments you had to make to it. You see it's on this evening and it's still producing a signal on the spectrum analyzer, so that means it hasn't thrown in the towel again. I just basically run these things for sort of like a couple of hours because this workshop does get a bit cold and damp at night. I've got dehumidifier in here, but particularly this signal generator is and the spectrum analyzer is very prone to that sort of thing. And actually it looks like I might need to do a recap on the IF section of this, or the top end section of this, because when you start it up when it's cold, I get some chattering relay sounds which suggest there's a bit of ripple on the power supply, something like that. But I digress. And then we got the bottom part of the spectrum analyzer that we replaced with the newer version with the Motorola chip. I spent about 10 hours trying to work out what the hell was wrong with it, only to find it was just a stuck switch. So that's probably the biggest waste of time in the workshop this year, trying to find out what was wrong with this spectrum analyzer, and then finally realised there wasn't really anything wrong with the spectrum analyzer at all. It was just a stuck switch, and I just needed to take a step back and think things through a bit. It's all working still okay. I heard a click and just thought something had thrown in the towel when I was talking about it. And then it was the problem with the SU3500 again, with the slight mains ripple, the noise, 50 Hz breakthrough, and that was tracked down to, if you remember, it was an earthing loop on the volume control, and we put an extra earth strap on it, and that's made that a hell of a lot better. That you can't actually hear the hum on it anymore. I was using the amplifier actually at the weekend, and that's fixed that totally. And that brings us up to sort of like the last month or so, and that's the Roberts R707, which I've repaired for a customer. And if you remember, I changed the IF transistors in the IF module, and only managed to get the FM section to work. But the customer seemed quite happy with that. Was quite happy with that. That seemed to go better than I was expecting. And it was the HP 3457A multimeter with the high ripple on it. And if you remember that we finally tracked that down to a noisy transistor after we replaced a few other bits and pieces and taking out chips, and it was a bit of a job to find the problem, but we certainly got it going, and that was good. The Pioneer F90, the Pioneer F90 that I had from about 4 years ago, that I bought a P3006, 3007 chip for it, put that in, and the replacement chip I was suspicious of. I thought it might have been a Chinese copy. I actually put it in and it worked fine, but that wasn't actually the problem, and I was confused a lot of people on my video, so I actually put the old chip back in, and then found that it looked like some sort of like alignment error, and I had a bit of a job getting the alignment in, but I added a capacitor to try and slow the sort of like the tank circuit down, and that seems to fix it. The thing tunes perfectly okay now. And my final video of this year was the sweeping of the R707, mainly for a demonstration of how I did it to Radio Cruncher, who's one of my subscribers, and most people know Radio Cruncher, Graham. He often does a live video on Saturday or Sunday, well worth a watch. So yeah, that was really sums it up, to be honest with you. It's a lot of stuff got on this year, and I've sort of quite surprised how much I've actually done. I thought it was less than that. I would also like to add a couple of newbies to the link below. So if you look below, you'll see a couple of new people who are just starting off. Darren is one of them. He's just getting into repairing old hi-fi stuff. He hasn't got many subscribers. It'd be really nice if you could subscribe and give him a bit of support, because he goes to a lot of time to make these videos, as do a lot of us. I know most of my videos are just thrown together, but a lot more people are going to a lot more effort than I am. I just sort of initially started this video channel off as a documentation for me, and then I realised people were interested in it. I've just basically carried on as how I was. So I'll link in a few people under the description thing, and just please go and have a look at them. If you're interested in it, subscribe to them. They'd appreciate it, I'd appreciate it. And that leaves me to just say Happy New Year. I'm back to work tomorrow, which is a bit of a depressing thought really, because I've had a sort of like a week and a half off. Really enjoyed it. I've spent a lot of time out and about and tinkering around in the workshop, and all I can say is roll on retirement. Thanks for watching.